Okay, this is, I guess, the third take now on showing you how I test my valve springs. The first two that I filmed, the first one I didn't like the way it turned out. I couldn't seem to remember half of what I was saying and was having kind of a tough time articulating. I don't know why. Hopefully I'm not today. But in the second video, after I filmed the first one, I had a bright idea of maybe a different way of doing it. So that's a video that I posted on YouTube last week for about a day or so. I think there's only 2 views, so only 2 people actually saw it. Then I realized it wasn't going to work, so I took it down, and towards the end of the video on this, I'll explain why it didn't work. But anyways, I put my valve springs in my Cummins 12-ton press and set it on my ProForm spring tester, and I have a calibrated spring that I test that with every time, and it shows right on every single time. So it's fairly accurate. I like to find 2 or 3 other springs to try a couple different ranges. Basically, it checks it in kind of a mid-range. I like to check it more at the two ranges that I would normally testing in, which would be the installed height, the seat pressure, and then also the pressure on the actual nose or lobe of the cam, max lift. Then I usually go ahead and test it at the max open number that they give on the spring setting, just to see if all that jives. But yeah, basically I just put it in this press, and then rather than going, like for example, these brand new comp cam springs, the installed height is 1 inch 910 thousandths, or 900 thousandths, I mean. Well, rather than going directly to 1 inch 900 thousandths, I'll crank the spring down to where it shows 210 pounds of seat pressure, which is what the spec is, and then I'll measure the installed height. And if that installed height is too far off one way or the other, not necessarily too far off to where maybe I have to compress it more to get to 1 inch 900, but if it's too far off to say I gotta set this spring at like 1 inch 850 in order to get that 210 pounds of seat pressure, then obviously that spring's no good. These, so far I've tested a little over half of these springs, and every one of them, I'm kind of impressed with the quality of these springs for not being they're just basically a standard chrome silicon dual spring. They've all been very close to being right on, definitely well within 5% right out of the box, so I'm happy about that. But anyways, I'll demonstrate here what I normally do. Okay, so I'll crank this down until I get 210 pounds of spring pressure. Close. Okay, that right there is 210. Now I take my Starrett dividers and I measure the height. And this is a part that I changed in the other video. I had a bright idea. I don't like using this because it's not as accurate as I would like it to be. Although I do find that it's more accurate than you would think. But what got me thinking about this, on the first video that I filmed doing this, I'm standing there holding these things down like that, and I'm thinking to myself, for looking at that, well, how's that accurate at all? It's not, and I'll probably do the same thing again. But it actually, surprisingly, they all come out pretty doggone close. So if I'm off a very small amount. But anyways, I'll just set that on there. And that up to the top of the spring. Eyeball it as closely as I can, which that's the part I don't like. I'm eyeballing this. I'm not actually measuring it. Now what I have done in the past also, I've measured the thickness of the retainer, and I've gone from the bottom of this block down, but I found that that doesn't, I don't know, it works, but it doesn't seem to be any more accurate to what I just showed you. But anyways, I get my mics, one to two mics, and then I measure that installed height. Okay, so that is 1 inch, excuse me, 1 inch 902. Now remember, I said the installed height of these springs is 1 inch 900 thousandths. So this isn't that bad of a method. It seems like that would not be very accurate. It's within 2 thousandths. And I see people using a stinking ruler testing these. So this is a lot more accurate than what a ruler would be. But anyways, now that I have that number, basically I'm just going to take 1 inch 900. It's within 2 thousandths of that. That's probably the difference between me holding this straight and not holding it straight. So I subtract, take the 1 inch 900, and I subtract the max lift of my cam, which actually I have 621 on the intake, 627 on the exhaust. So I take basically the center of that, well, more or less the center. I just take 625 since that's a quick, easy reading. Okay, so minus 625 lift. Okay, that comes up with 1 inch 275. All right. Now it's a lot easier to do this with these dowel calipers than it is with the inside mics, because these the outside mics, these particular mics are literally probably 100 years old and they have no friction lock on them, so they tend to move around. So okay, so 1 inch 275. Right there. Okay, and I'll set this to 1 inch 275. Okay, now I'll crank this spring down to 1 inch 275, which would be the equivalent to going to 625 lift. And we'll see where we're at on the spring pressure. And again, eyeballing this, so it's going to be off a few thousandths, but not, seems to be definitely close enough. Okay, we are at exactly 500. That's good. I wanted about 500 on the nose, so that's what we have is 500 on the nose. So that's good. So basically at max lift, or doggone close to max lift, we're going to have 500 pounds on the nose, which should keep that roller lifter on the end of that lobe. Okay, so let's see, got the box over here. Max open 1 inch 250. So basically I need to go another 25 thousandths. Press this down, another 25 thousandths. And I end up with 520. So those springs are spot on. And every one that I've tested so far has been this way. Like I said, I'm very impressed with these CompCam springs. They're nothing special. Just plain old chrome silicon. The part number on them is CompCam's 954-16. and every one of them has been right spot on. I'm really quite surprised at that. And also, that proves that my spring tester and my method is accurate. Because if it wasn't accurate, and if these springs weren't within spec, then I wouldn't be getting these same numbers on every one of them. Okay, so let's talk about the mistake that I made and what I thought was a good idea. I had the bright idea of using a dowel indicator, of hanging that right on the side just like that, bringing it down to this plate, and measuring my travel. Seemed like a great idea, and that's actually the way that I filmed my first video. And I think actually it was the second video, and if I remember right, I was testing the AFR springs, the ones that actually came off of these heads. And the numbers were off, but the heads and the springs had 60, 70 runs on them, so I kind of expected them to be off. I kind of thought they may not be all perfect, maybe, say one or two valves at some point bounced on the seat a bunch of times, heated up, weakened those springs. So the variation was somewhat expected. But then when I came to my comp cam springs, I had a huge variation with them. And at first I was really angry. I'm like, what kind of garbage is Comp Cams selling me? And obviously, as I just showed you here, they weren't garbage. These are high quality springs. And I was highly disappointed at that time, because normally I go with Comp Cams because in most parts they do tend to be good quality for the price. Well, you can't use this dowel indicator to do this. It took me a while to figure out why, but here's why. You're measuring not only the compression of the spring, you're also measuring the compression of that piston as it goes down. And as you go deeper and the spring pressure goes higher, this piston compresses farther. And that's where you get your reading. So that was throwing my reading totally off. I was getting installed heights on these Comp Cam springs of, say, 1-inch 820, and I'm like, what's going on? Something's wrong here. I can't imagine they're all that bad. Either Comp Cam sent me the wrong springs or something, and I started thinking about what was going on and looking at what was going on. I was like, wait a minute, I can't do this. I can't do this because I'm compressing this and this. So I'm measuring the travel of this, compressing, along with the compression of the spring. So that method doesn't work at all. But believe it or not, this is actually quite accurate. As long as you're careful and you watch what you're doing. But I just kind of thought I'd relay that information to a couple of people that did happen to watch the first video, and then I pulled it within less than a day. If anybody wondered why that happened, well, that's why. The method that I thought I had a great idea on isn't going to work. And I'm also starting to wonder now, some of the spring testers that you buy have a little linear scale on the side, which I was going to, at some point, you can get those off of eBay fairly cheaply. I was going to buy one of those to experiment with. Well, I'm wondering if you don't run into the same problem with those spring testers, or if maybe you have to compensate for that, or maybe somebody has a compensation factor. If anybody owns one of those or uses it, maybe something's different on it. I don't know. I'd be kind of curious to see what you run into with it, or maybe people aren't testing their springs correctly with it because of that. But anyway, I just thought I'd talk about that towards the end here, and probably spent more time talking about that than I did actually testing the springs. But that's the way I do them, and I've got 3 more left, and I'll have them all done. And the good thing about it is, really, if I set every one of these a 1-inch 900, I'm probably within 3 or 4 pounds on the seat on every single one. So I'm not going to have to shim every one of these spring heights differently, which is good. And like I said, what I usually do is I'll shim them about 10 thousandths more, or more compressed. So in other words, I'll shim it at 1/8 890. That'll allow for a little bit of the relaxation that will happen with the spring once it's used for a while. But, well, that's how I do it anyways.